that's what is being sold, you'd probably have to, get variances from that because you're essentially shrinking the lot around the building footprint, or perhaps just off of it to include the patio slab or some such thing. Well, I mean, one example that was just completed is in the Providence section. They have 4 townhouses that they just created. They're rear loaded off a public alley, and then on their fronts they have a public street. And they came in originally with their construction plans. They sort of had a pad site for the units that they were going to be there. But you can't actually create the lots until you actually pour the foundations and can shoot them, And so once those foundations were poured, then the surveyor had something to go off of, and then they were able to create the lot that's running through the party walls. And that's what they locked down in their final plat.
Was that done as a PD?
It was, yeah. So what we're trying to do is essentially allow something like that to happen by right, through a by right zoning district. Well, in that instance, no, they actually have a front and a backyard that's the owner's land. That's part of the package, yeah. So the intent was not to create, like some of the PDs have done, where you just own up to your foundation, maybe a foot off of it, so you can access it, and then the rest is HOA owned. That wasn't our intent. Our intent was to actually create yards with these, both an urban and a suburban variety, based off of examples we have in town that have largely been done through PDs, like Catherwood, Providence, so 5th Street.
Duplexes, triplexes. Each unit has its own lot number, 12A, 12B, 12C.
Right.
And you own a little bit of ground behind your unit, in front of your unit, but then the rest of it is all common.
Right. So, like on 5th Street, there's no common area. You have a 2-acre block. Half of it is bisected by an alley. They platted everything on their half, and it's all fee simple ownership, right up to the right-of-way boundaries. And so they have modest little yards in the front, on the sides, for the end units, in the back. They have detached garages that offload onto the alleys. One thing that's pretty flexible with this is that you could create essentially a community like off of a private drive, because we're allowing garageless units, essentially. You're allowed, it's one space per unit, but the space doesn't have to be on the property. It can be within 500 feet of it. So you could have like a common parking lot. I lived in one of these back in Northern Virginia, and it was right off, common, public street, driveway, common parking area, fairly modest. The units were all stacked around it, but you still had your setbacks, but it was obviously, you're far away from the public street, so it really comes down to the designer. How much yard do you want to give them, beyond the minimum. And so. So yeah, but if you wanted to shrink the actual lot footprint to just hug the foundation, then yeah, you'd have to come back with variances for that, to do that. Or do it as a PD, which we have examples of that. Even on the single-family detached side, we have examples of that.
Is that a PD?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Catherwood's a PD. I remember Malacas's Rainy Brook, Reserve at Rainy Brook. Those are basically boxes. And that was like your build-to line. You put your house in the box. The box is detached from the public street. And you own, roughly a couple of feet off the foundation, more or less. But the intent was to essentially create a maintenance-free sort of situation where the HOA takes care of all the grounds. So.
Ryan, where,
Hey, yeah.
Yeah, could you both
Yeah.
tell what you said?
Oh, thank you.
You can share the mic.
Yeah. Come on up if you've got more to say.
I would just say, in trying to do a development where you're doing 50 4 12-plex buildings, it sounds like it might be better to do a PD. The problem with a PD in some jurisdictions are that you can spend a lot of money on a PD and work out all the details with the staff and with the city administration and get killed at city council meeting. So we all know that. And that doesn't happen often, but it can. So I'm just trying to think the most efficient way of trying to do a development where you know as you go through all the steps and you spend all your money that you're hopefully going to come to a conclusion that's going to be positive.
Right. Well, and on that point, if you achieve like I said, we're creating 2 by right zoning districts. So, if you achieve the rezoning to R1T or R1TU, well, then you have your development rights. At that point, you go through the subdivision process. And there's no controversy there.
City street or accepted streets.
Come to the mic if you got a comment, please.
I said, wouldn't that be if it's just with city streets and not private streets?
Darren, you might give us your name, so.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Darren.
For the record.
Darren Sorensen.
We don't know who you
For
are,
the record,
Darren.
Darren Sorensen. Troublemaker. I guess I like what you're trying to do. I really do. But I think it's more, to me, it's more for infill than it would be for like a 50-lot subdivision.
Potentially.
I wouldn't do that, so but I wouldn't. But my point that as I look through what you've given us is, even though we're not doing PDs or we're trying to get away from PDs, we still have that caveat in here where it says that the administrative officer can dictate your exterior colors, your windows, your doors, your facades. And so now we're stuck right back to where we were at. So I would say I'm not adverse to having different types of looks for these things, but we're looking to do affordable housing, but then we're trying to throw on could be, and I'm not saying that Dave would do that, but maybe in the future, somebody else could say, well, I'm the administrative officer, so I'm going to make sure that all the windows are wood, and I want brick facades, and I mean, on and on and on. Where do you stop? So I guess my point is that I'd rather not see that in this, or at least something a little less stringent, saying what they can tell us what we need to do in order to get approval. Because then we're right back into PDs, to me.
Yeah, I think on that point, I understand where you're headed with that, and our whole objective is to prevent monotony.
I get it.
I get it. So if the AO, doesn't have discretion, then we need to be prescriptive. And so I'd be very open to ideas about how we can make something that's prescriptive that could be varied. You could get a variance from it, but it's something everybody could live with.
Well, putting the buildings, with a 2-foot setback back and forth, that helps a lot in what the
breaks up
the streetscape is.
Right.
The problem is that we're trying to do affordable housing here, and if that's true, what we're trying to do, then we don't need to be lumping on more things that's going to make these things more expensive and more expensive.
Right.
And going further on that issue, I had asked, and I saw that there was your return comments were that R2TU would
Right.
be a new zoning category that we thought would be a good idea, which would basically allow someone to do duplexes, but lineal, or not lineal, but on top of each other,
Right.
instead of what we have now. It's the R2U and the R2 we do have, but the lot widths are 60 feet wide, and these are 20 feet. So if we're looking for affordability, we could do an R2TU and say the townhouse could be owner occupied with a lower unit that could be rented out by the owner of that unit, which would then offset their costs and their expenses.
On that point, the ordinance committee's not been introduced to this idea,
I'm
but tomorrow at the administrative officers meeting, we're actually going to bring up this idea of the stacked townhouse. It's essentially a 2-family attached unit, so.
On top of each other.
Right.
I think we're not talking about side by
Not
side.
condo ownership. It's not 2 units. It's a single building, but they're abutting, party walls. And you're right, yeah, you could have an owner and then somebody else would have the other unit. Or they could both be owned by a landlord and rented out. To that end, I would say that, you know, if you wanted to just create multifamily, you could do that now in R3.
Well, I guess that's true. That is true.
So, yeah, so if you wanted to create that stack thing, it just.
But I think, again, we're talking about ownership, so
Right,
there's just a
that's right.
single unit is
Right.
owned, you know. with-
And certainly the affordability is a big part of this effort. But obviously, the development requirements are all minimums, so if someone wanted to go bigger, more luxury, they would certainly have that ability to. So, and like I said, all the elements in here would be subject to variances if there's a compelling need. But I'm certainly open to ideas on, you know, making something maybe more prescriptive, not as arbitrary.
Well, it is arbitrary.
So-
That was my problem. I mean, I get if we have a list of things that could be called out, that would be better than saying, okay, like, everything's going to be hardy board from here on out. And
Right.
that,
Yeah.
because that costs a ton more to
Right.
do. than-
Well, and the state of the art's always changing.
Right.
And so I don't want to be that prescriptive. Yeah. So.
All right. Other than that, I think that this is a good idea.
Great.
Appreciate it.
Thank you. Chad, did you have any? All right.
Chad Spitznagel, Building Commissioner. Just two comments. One, I would hesitantly agree with them on the avoiding variance for a setback. If there was a way to still have the property line go around the building and then still use the common area in the development plan as the setback, so when you're reviewing it, even though that townhouse, the interior is going to be sold to them, the exterior is still a part of the development, and you could still count that setback to avoid them from coming in for a variance. So kind of working on that. And then two, on the stack stuff, we're going to have to go back and look at building code definitions, because the building code's pretty specific on townhouses, 1 and 2 family homes being in the residential code, and condos being in the commercial code. So when you stack it, we might lose that definition of the two-sided party wall. I'm not saying that it can. I want to double check that definition before it goes into a condo and you're sprinkling it, so.
Yeah, and we'll chat about this tomorrow at AO's. I've been having some back and forth with Chad about this issue because if you have to sprinkle, you know, then suddenly your cost savings goes out the window, and, you know, why are we doing this? But, you know, obviously the 2-hour firewall, that's pretty clear on the residential side. You don't need to sprinkle a townhouse if it's fire-rated wall. But in terms of a fire-rated floor between the units that would prevent sprinkling, I'm not aware of such a thing, unless our builders know of such a thing. So in those instances, you might have to sprinkle. So, and the recent condo conversion PD that we did on 4th Street is one of those. Those are stacked townhouses, essentially, in terms of how they look from the street. But they are individual condos that have been platted, and it's a sprinkled building, you know, so anyway. Sir?
Question for developers. Steve, you made a comment about vegetative cover piece, that if we could, if you just take the footprint of the building, and this for people that are looking for maintenance-free type situation, is there a detriment to the developer if they earmark the land for Chad's idea, combine it and say, hey, this would take care of all the requirements, but now you can't do anything else with the land because the common areas, that's what we're using to make the requirements fulfilled?
Well, I lived in a project, Skyline Ridge, which is part of Sawmill, and those were either duplexes or triplexes. And I think the building envelope was like 80 by 80, and you could put a duplex inside that building envelope. After we built those, we came back and did as-built drawings, because some of those got shifted a little bit. Some even got shifted a little bit out of the building envelope. That was done as a PD. We did a minor modification to accept the new revised plat, final plat, and recorded it, and so now all the buildings were within the property lines. But to answer your question, I think that worked well up there, because you had a little footprint that the building set on. Everything else was common, so you couldn't go out and do your vegetable garden without the HOA permission. You couldn't go out and plant a bunch of trees in the yard without the HOA's permission, since it was really common area ground. And that worked well and worked as a PD. And quite frankly, what I think I'm talking about is if you want to do a 60-unit owner-occupied, and I'm familiar with that, because back in the 80s when I worked for National Homes, there was a developer in Bloomington that built a bunch of fourplex. He called them Investiplex. That was before they changed the tax code. But those things were being bought primarily by college student parents, and they were the kiddie condos, but a lot of other people bought those too, and it was very, very successful. But those were fee simple ownership, which we've got, what, 2 mortgage people in here. That, you got to be careful too on how you structure some of these, because if you don't structure it so Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae want to buy the loans, they're not going to be as marketable as something else might be. So that's another thing you got to take into consideration. How do you structure this? How's the ownership structured that makes it attractive to potential lenders that want to make the loan on it? But did I kind of, Jackson, did I?
Yeah, I think in a PD, you're using the land anyways and saying, okay, it's going to be part of it, you can't change it, and I'm kind of.
Without the HOA saying, yeah.
Correct, but well, from an APC standpoint, from a city, wherever it is, you can't change, they can change land for a vegetable garden or something, but
Yeah.
you can't build another
No,
building.
put another structure. You have no more building rights on it.
And I'm saying, would developers be okay with that same type of philosophy within this, to say, okay, you got your envelope, we can say, and now the HOA or the common area is going to act and cover the requirements of vegetative cover.
Would that,
And we're going to merge the two together to say, okay, now we're fulfilling all, we're checking all boxes.
Yeah, I mean, from the street, you couldn't tell the difference.
Nobody would have any clue.
right.
It's the same sort of setup. For all of it.
Yeah.
You agree with that? Because if you do a PD,
Philosophically, I have no problem with it.
And my question.
I mean, we have PDs got around that have functioned that way for years. Sawmills is one of the old ones.
Yeah. I guess my point is, I don't want to propose something that thinks good, but is ultimately detrimental
Right.
to development.
we'll give you another example. You know what, correct me if I'm wrong, what Dan Teeter did on Happy Hollow Hill, where he built, what was that called, the Tower Ivory or something? I think that was zoned R2, and he went in and built it out as a duplex subdivision, and then came back and did a PD to create the ability to sell each side off.
That's right, I've heard of this one, yeah. I know about this one,
And, but that was the intent all along, I think.
right. So they're essentially, they're now townhouses, but they're duplex buildings. but
Right.
There's a lot line running between them.
Right, to allow you to sell off each side. Basically, created a new subdivision out of,
Because this allows, a minimum of 2 units, per stick of townhouses, or up to 10 in a stick, unless the building code says otherwise. And so, you would have at a minimum, 2 houses together, lot line running between them through their party wall.
yeah, those were duplexes that you could buy each side, but that was probably done as a PD
Yeah, it was.
on Morehouse Road.
It's an older PD, but yeah, that's how they did it.
So Dan did a reverse PD. He did a multifamily subdivision, then he came back in and did a PD so he could split it up.
How did we just do that? Was it Rosewood or something there off Lindbergh? Was that a PD?
Oh, the most recent one?
Yeah, the
West
townhouse.
Heights?
What was it called?
Off Klondike, West Heights condominiums?
Oh, yeah, that's it. I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
Klondike
Yeah.
and Cumberland?
Yes, I'm sorry. Yes, that's it.
Yeah, from the street, they are essentially single-family attached units. But it is a condo regime, and so you just own your footprint. Well, in this case, you own your interior walls. I mean,
But it was a PD.
it was a plan development.
But they could have done it this way.
Yeah, it's kind of what Darren described is what that project will look like from the street, is that, you have a fee simple lot, because those units aren't stacked at West Heights. It's just a single unit.
Exactly.
Going up. It's 2 stories only. But the owner owns just that his footprint, you know, and that's it. Then the condo association would take care of everything on the outside.
Okay, so the owner does
Presumably,
not own the front
along with the
yard?
exteriors as well, because it's condo, so you own the interior. You know, of the
Okay,
unit.
drywall in.
Right.
So.
You
but
own your
it-
four walls, so to speak,
Yeah.
yeah.
And in that project, there is no front yard or backyard?
There is, but it's, the condo
It's
association
HOA.
runs it.
Okay.
Yeah, and on the single-family detached side, like I said, Mille Lacs is, I think it's Reserve at Rainy Brook 2.
Right. That's where I live.
Is like that.
Yeah.
You know, those homes, from the street, it looks like a, you know, it's a little tighter in, but it's, you have front yards, backyards, side yards. But legally, the lot line is, you know, very tight around the foundation of each home. And that's just how it was negotiated. And
Right.
so you have a front yard, but the HOA is the one that's mowing it and planting it and caring for it, so. Yeah, I guess from my point of view, I'm fine with that idea of possibly having this option of essentially tightening up you know, the lot lines around the foundations, presumably because an association is going to be caring for the exteriors. We honestly hadn't contemplated that, you know. This is sort of the first time it's been kind of, you know, mentioned. So before, we were just thinking of more conventional, you know, everyone gets a front yard and a backyard. If you're an end unit, you get a little side yard. That's it, you know, so.
Brian, could it be either or?
Yeah, I think there should be essentially an option for that. I mean, essentially we'd be decoupling the lots from streets. You know, so right now we have it structured that if you're off a local street, if you're off an arterial, you know, but if in this instance you're not on a street at all, you know, you're back off of it. You know, your lot is now not physically connected to a street. You have to make sure that doesn't run afoul of the subdivision and ordinance somehow, but we'll. But I think philosophically we're all on the same page with this idea. I think we just need to work through the details and maybe make some changes here. So I think we've got some homework to do. And again, you know, you thought of the idea, so I'd welcome your input, you know, so we can get this right.
One thing that might help is it possible to do a little drawing of, because I'm still a little confused. If I want to build owner-occupied 60 duplex, or 30 duplexes, so 60 units, would 2 of those units be on a lot with a lot line through the middle of it? I mean, could you maybe
Right.
do a little example drawing of what
Yeah,
lot would look like?
and like, as I mentioned to Ordinance Committee last month, Barry from KJG Architecture actually ran this ordinance through a design test. And I anticipated these questions coming up about his drawings, so I actually asked him, did you save any of your drawings? Because he and I worked through this kind of in the late winter. And he had done basically just some, you know, plan view in AutoCAD, nothing pretty, nothing that I think would, you know, win you over. So I wasn't going to presume on his, you know, pro bono work any further. But internally as a staff, we've actually been just using Google SketchUp to try to make some drawings of this. I think it's probably worth, I think, going through this exercise to kind of more render these better so you can visualize them. But yeah, what you described about, you know, saying you're just going to create 2 townhouse units with a lot line running through them, well, you essentially just have 2 end units. And so by this ordinance, they would each have to have their little modest side yards, their minimum front and rear yards. And then depending if they're off of a public street, then there would be an added setback. But if they're not, if you're creating lots internal to a site off essentially a private driveway into a parking area, or perhaps a private drive that's going to their garages, then those setbacks, those minimums are just minimums to a lot line, you know, that they're not abutting a public right-of-way. You know, so we really wanted to create that sort of option for more of the suburban type, where you have, you know, a lot more land to work with, you have a lot more units you can put in there. You're not doing urban infill on a typical 1 acre, you know, Lafayette block. You know, you're actually designing a community that's in a greenfield site, And, maybe a mixed density, you maybe have some R1B over here, you have some townhouses here. That's the picture Ryan Kennedy painted for me when we were in development. He actually came to us cold and said, hey, I'm interested in maybe doing townhouses. Like, really? We're writing an ordinance right now. And he described that sort of picture where he was thinking about a community that was maybe split, single detached, single attached as part of a whole. And so we sort of had that in mind with, this obviously isn't an urban infill site, this is a greenfield development on in a more suburban environment. So
Mr. Leverins, these are all conversations that should be taking place before the hearing, so I guess we're looking for a continuance for this.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, we'll
Mr. Schrader.
certainly take questions if there's more to answer here. Otherwise, if nothing, we'll go back to the drawing board, so to speak, and then come back to you when we're ready. We'll
Sorry, Gary.
work with our
thank you,
partners behind
David.
us.
I was getting to the point to saying, is there an opportunity or need for a meeting between developers
Yeah.
and staff, it looks
Yeah,
like?
no, we'll bash our collective heads together
So
and
we'll just-
come back to you when we're ready.
Sounds like a good idea. I think.
Thank you.
Good work. If there's nothing else on that, and nothing else on the agenda, yes. Come up to the, citizens' comment. Yeah, okay, citizens' comments. That's where we're
One
at.
thing that we have talked from the Builders Association for quite some time and with developers is the requirement for a sidewalk bond in a new development.
Let's meet.
Okay.
This isn't the place for those.
Well, I just wanted to get it on the agenda to talk about it because there's some issues with, I think the public can be protected, making sure a sidewalk gets in without the cumbersome procedure to,
Right, we talked about that.
Yeah.
And I was asking
Well,
for a
first-
letter from Bagel, which we haven't received yet. So anyway, these are things we should,
once I tell her what.
these are things we should be meeting about.
Okay, but then we get it on the agenda.
Okay, good point. Any other citizens' comments? Hearing none, I'll take that final motion.
Move we adjourn.